I'm not, I have my reservations about all of this, particularly at the low end, and I'll tell you why. I think what none of us can really quantify, but things that you can't quantify still exist. And futures you can't quantify still exist. And a lot of what is quantified wrongly. We had a classic case of this. The Minister was in last week and she admitted to us that the 2017 PRSI projections in terms of deficits were way off the mark and that they were in a surplus rather than deficit. So even 5 years projections are more fiction than fact. Now, I suppose, and this goes to the nub of where we put our people's money, on the pay-as-you-go system for the state pension, the great thing is that it's a levelling up pension. In other words, I pay in a lot, people in high incomes pay in a lot more money than people in low incomes. But everybody gets the same state pension if you have enough contributions up. In other words, it only counts the number of contributions. It doesn't have any relativity to what you pay. And that's a great leveller up in this society. And this, I think, is the point very ably made by our chairperson, that if you're sitting here as a politician, do you concentrate particularly on the people on low incomes and putting your effort and money and the state's money in, because remember the state, either through tax relief or through the 25% top-up, is a contributor, a significant contributor to pensions. And are you better doing it that way or putting it into the pay-as-you-go system? Because the pay-as-you-go system is the ultimate one. If I might say so, part-time women, €38 a week, you get your full contribution. And the person earning 200,000 a year and paying PRSI the whole way up gets the exact same pension. So I suppose the challenge here is in making sure everyone's got this pension. Are we actually tempting future politicians to say, should they all have this private pension, which they won't have? So can we now dispense with being very generous and can we make the basic state pension much less? Now, that's not anything you can quantify, but it's something that we can bring our political heads to. So I'd have to say that, as I said, it actually is the greatest leveller of the gender pay gap. And I often think about the gender pay gap. In some situations of couples, it's largely irrelevant. What, they work on the base, what's yours is mine, what's mine is yours. So if one has a higher income than the other, whether it's the man or the woman, it's irrelevant because it goes into a common pot. In other cases, it's a massive issue. It's a massive practical day-to-day issue. Very hard for us to find out which in any individual case. But I'm not sure has any state ever had, on average, women earning over a career, on average, and I'm talking about averages as men, and if not, you need other mechanisms to level off the gap, particularly in terms of securing old age, and that's where the state pension comes in. So we have a huge challenge on that one. And there's choice of individuals, choice of couples, there's choice of families. There's all sorts of things to come to play here, as we know as politicians, sitting with the real people who make real decisions. Just one question, if I might go off on a totally different tack for a minute. I've raised this before. We have a very small open economy. And you mentioned that 21 billion would be in this fund. From the experience of the insurance industry, how much of that will be invested in this economy and how much of all that money put in by people in this economy, including the state, would be a quarter shareholder that have 5 billion in? How much on average do insurance funds and pension funds or whatever in this country get invested in foreign bonds in foreign equities and so on, and how much would be retained in the economy?
Thanks, Deputy Ó Cuív. Who wants to come back on that? Ms. Murdoch?
Yep, I'll come back on that. And I would acknowledge what Deputy Ó Cuív talks about, the challenge on the gender pension gap that exists. And while the auto-enrolment scheme will certainly go some way to address the coverage, it is a fact, and the ESRI report recently highlighted that women on retirement are retiring on 35% less than their male counterparts. And as it's set up under the current design principles, the auto-enrolment scheme is not going to permit closure of that. And women live longer than men, that is a fact. That 35% is approximately on average €150 a week. And I think what we need to get our heads around is this perception that women can afford to live on a lot less than their male counterparts when they retire. When up to retirement, they were probably earning equal amounts in many cases. But because of all of the gaps and because of all of the interruptions in their earning capacity over their life career, they end up with a lot less. And while Ireland does have pension equity at retirement on the state pension, I would argue it is not adequate, and it will, we all recognise that it's a growing liability and it's a growing problem. So we believe that addressing the design principles now will certainly allow women to make the decisions that they want to make for their own financial independence on retirement, that they will be able to put aside the money that they feel that they can afford independently. And yes, I acknowledge that in households there is a combined pool of money there, and traditionally the male earner was the major earner, but lifestyles have changed and households have changed, and we need to come up with a scheme that will allow to adapt to that new working environment and ensure that women have an adequate pension on retirement. So I would be pushing to say we must do as much as we can now to close that gap and not put it off to the long finger and say we'll fix it down the line. I don't think that's serving women well at all in this country, and I think we need to fix it now. In terms of the investment of the funds, whether they're in Ireland or in bonds or other investment products abroad, that will be a decision for the CPA under the current design principles. There will be some choice, but there will be a default for members to pick probably what you'd call the safest option there, but they will be able to make more risk-based decisions on where their pot goes, as is the case with any pension investment product, that whether it's a private pension, you can work with your advisor and where you want those investments to go. So I wouldn't be able to predict what the investment strategy might be, but yes, 21 billion in 10 years is a significant investment fund, and obviously, that would be taken into consideration where to put it best and get the best return for the members of the schemes going. And I'm sure the wisest decisions will be made to bring the correct return for the scheme itself and make it a viable scheme. But that's what pension providers in Ireland do already for all of their private pension and occupational pension schemes, and they have to be accountable to the trustees. And under this scheme, I presume that the Master Trust will also have an overseeing role in that regard as well. But it is a considerable responsibility for both the board of the CPA and the CPA executives responsible for this function.
Deputy Ó Cuív.
That wasn't really the question. I asked, on current pension funds, do we have any breakdown in relation to how much of Irish pension funds are vested here and abroad? And particularly, my understanding is in the last 10 years, when you start going towards retirement, the investment strategy gets more conservative, and then many times it's state bonds. But my understanding also was, and this might have changed in the last 10 years, and you might be able to inform me, that, for
Okay.
example, in Ireland, they tended to buy German state bonds rather than, say, Irish state bonds, even though the yield from an Irish state bond is greater than a German state bond because they perceive some risk there. And I was just wondering, you know, could you maybe fill in what's happening at the moment? And presumably, anybody set up, whether it's independent or, as you propose, part of the industry will follow the same model. I'm just wondering,
Okay, I'll come back to you on that. I think
Ms. Torrington,
we need
yes.
to just do a bit of a survey on members. They may all have different profiles of members, and that would result in a different sort of investment strategy there. But we'll come back to you on that, Deputy.
Ms. Torrington.
Deputy, with a little bit more. We've got, we do a publication in Insurance Ireland Fact File. So we do look at how much is invested. We look at policies, basically statistics around the life and pensions as well as the GI market. So we do have a breakdown of underlying investments that are invested in Irish equities and underlying that's invested in the rest of EU and global. So while we may not be able to pinpoint it down as close as to pension funds versus investment funds, or those held outside the pension, we certainly can provide you with some data from the last few years on the split between investments in Irish kind of equities, fixed interest securities, etc., and the rest of the EU and abroad.
can you break that down between equities and, we say, more secure investments such as government bonds?
We do, yes. We split it into, sorry, I'm just trying to cast my mind back now. We do split it into bonds, equities, property funds, etc. So we will have a split down. Our most recent one is 2020. I think we should be able to get that to you fairly quickly.
Great, thank you.
Could I just pick up on one other point from the Deputy? You did make a very interesting point that a lot of households make the decision that the pension is a household pension, and you know what's mine is yours, what's yours is mine, etc.
Yeah.
And I think that's great, and that's all well and good until perhaps further down the line and things break down and you have a divorce situation. And then what happens to the pension? Because it's what's yours is mine, what's mine is yours, but it's in one person's name. So I think it's incredibly important to actually bear that in mind in cases of divorce, because frequently the pension can be the second largest financial asset after the family home. So more frequently, the family home is the topic of discussion. And we must remember that there is functionality there for the remaining spouse, the spouse who stayed at home, for example, and forwent the contributions into their pension. There is a mechanism there to ensure that the main pension is split legally under a pension adjustment order. I think that's very, very important, and you know, certainly for the gender pension gap and for women in retirement who perhaps didn't get the opportunity to put as much pension contributions in the accumulation period, do have that open to them as well.
Yeah, but that's why I think you're missing the point I was making.
No,
the only pension that really does something dramatic for the gender pay gap is the state pension. It's ruthless in what it does. And it does it for the pay gap in general, and it does for the gender pay gap. It rewards all workers equally in terms of cash. Now, what I'm afraid of, because I've been around this side of the shop a while, is that in time, the system will use leverage to start depressing the state pension, which is the really good one for tackling the gender pay gap and the income pay gap between those who have very good employment or whatever, in favour of this system. So you'll have three systems. You'll have the private pensions, you'll have this pension and the state pension. But the one that will be most ruthless in defending those on low incomes and the gender pay gap. Now, you can't quantify, I can't quantify, nobody can quantify.
No
But what I do know
in
is
relation to
that millions of times, well, you know, a lot of times in my career, you're told a thing will not happen in the future. It won't have that consequences, Deputy.
But if that's the case, if that risk exists, shouldn't we make sure that the foundations of the auto-enrolment system now is as fair and equitable across as possible, if there is a risk in the future?
Look, I think we're getting into a very technical debate here, and it's one that the committee will be considering in greater detail.